Hey there, it's Irene at Lyon. Welcome to this video, to this YouTube channel, and to this world of healing trauma, nervous system health, and all things neuroplasticity. Today I want to talk about safety. And there's a little bit of a backstory to this. So let me explain why this is top of mind for me right now. And we'll go into some elements around nervous system healing and safety and what safety actually means. But on two instances this past little while, I've had the discussion around why it's important for us to establish safety in our system, within our cells, cellularly, in the autonomic nervous system. It's not just something that's in the brain and in the thoughts, meaning if someone was brought up in a very unfriendly, toxic, hostile, threatening, unsafe environment from a very young age, even in utero, and even maybe transgenerationally, there will be an essence, a cellular quality inside that basically thinks that the entire world and everything in it is dangerous, that they are not safe, that everyone's out to get them, everyone's trying to kill them, and that we are all going to die. And I've talked and worked with enough people to know that this is kind of a general quality that someone feels in their cells when they have had a lot of early adversity. And one thing to note is it doesn't have to be adversity and traumatic experiences that are happening from our parental systems, from our home life. It could be, let's say, a child or an infant who is born with some kind of medical problem or defect, or maybe has some form of cancer, leukemia, and they have to go through numerous medical appointments and surgeries and interventions at a young age. That can establish in an individual later in life, and often will, a sense of things are dangerous because they've been poked and prodded and not harmed, they've been saved. But the nervous system, the somatic system at a young infant level can't make sense of what's going on. Therefore, it creates the situation where that human being is on hyper alert and vigilant. Or the flip side, the hyper alert and vigilance hasn't been able to be maintained, and they go into what's called a shutdown response, which is this kind of freeze-based response, which I've talked about in other videos. So I'll post some of those below because I don't want to get into the branches of the nervous system today. So rolling back to this concept of safety. Now, I was talking to someone who I was on a podcast interview thing, and it was for practitioners in the healing and health world. And they said, so what we want to do then is make sure that we create safety for the client. And I said, that is true. Us as the practitioner, me the practitioner, I'm not going to come in and start being, hostile and mean and hurting my client. Of course, we won't do that. Of course not. But if our client, if our student, our patient, however you want to call them, has this history of this toxic, hostile environment, me as the practitioner making it safe, being safe, isn't going to have it's not going to transfer to that person through osmosis. While I am being safe and not doing anything to harm that person, their physiology still doesn't trust me. They still think that I am a danger, even though cognitively they know this person isn't hurting me, I'm here, they're here to help me, etc., etc. Their physiology, something called their neuroception, which is the perception of danger or safety. This was coined by Dr. Stephen Porges. Their neuroception is going to be faulty. And yes, person, is safe. I can see they're not harming me. They're clearly here to help me, but my physiology is saying, don't trust that person. Don't trust that person. And so I said to this individual I was talking to, I said, here's the thing. Sometimes if we try to be overly safe in our actions to the point where the person actually will feel a threat from all these actions, that can drive their system into more distrust. And so this is where, again, this work isn't cut and dry. We have to understand how the physiology within, internally, either in ourselves or our students or clients, is assessing the environment. And so this brings me back to another interesting and very important question that somebody asked me on Instagram earlier this week as well. I posted an image with a few words that said, bring curiosity to the thoughts. So be curious with your thoughts. Now, for some of us, that might work. We bring curiosity, like, oh, why am I thinking that? Or why am I saying these terrible things to myself? Or whatever it might be. Our brains can go amok and drive us into these holes that aren't useful. So my suggestion was be curious. And I'm going to read the caption that I put with this just for context. So I said, be curious with your thoughts. And then I went to say, when curiosity can guide us, we teeter a little more towards healing and less towards survival, stress, and struggle. But you got to keep it up. It ain't a one-time affair. I chose my words very carefully there. Teeter, meaning we inch, we titrate. So when we can have curiosity guide us, we get a little closer to healing. But it isn't just this big blowout, oh, I'm going to be curious and everything's going to be better. It takes time. And so someone asked a very good question, and it went something like this. You can't be curious about something you dread. You can pretend to be, but that's not for real. And that's 100% true. If we are living in a survival soup, if we still haven't done the work, the hardcore, committed, consistent, contained, safe work to work on our stored survival stressors, our survival responses, the fight, flight, and freeze. Simplifying here, but if we haven't yet started that journey, then yes, trying to be curious with this crazy stuff that we're feeling and something that we dread, fearing going outside, fearing going into that public environment, putting ourselves on the spot, all these things, it can't just again be, oh, I'll just be curious and everything will be fine. So again, context is important here. They then write, only if you feel safe enough is there room for genuine curiosity. That's true. When we have more safety and cellular safety on board, it opens up the capacity in our system to have a bit more curiosity. But if someone is living in absolute terror, think about I just had an image of a dog or an animal that's been brutally abused and mistreated. When we find these animals, you can't just go in and start hugging them and petting them. They're not going to let you. They're going to growl, they might bite, they might cower, they might do all sorts of things that could put us into danger, right? So there needs to be a building of trust slowly. And even though you're being kind to that animal, they're not going to just be instantly, oh, they're being kind, this must be okay. So going back to the comment question. And so they say, so safety comes first, but how? How does one conjure up a sense of safety where fear is and has been ruling the system? And so here's what's interesting. Safety, we want to come first, but if we put that scenario into the picture of someone who's never been safe, where the world is dangerous, we can't trust anyone, we actually won't find safety first. It has to be slowly cultivated. It's not just going to happen like that. And so part of this deeper healing work, part of building towards being curious with our thoughts, is starting to become curious with our physiology, this body of ours and what we feel inside. And one of the tenets of the work I teach my students and clients, and what I teach you here around building more regulation and building more safety in the system is first being able to sense the bad, scary stuff that we feel in our physiology. That might seem crazy. Why would I want to sense the bad, scary stuff inside? The reason why is for it to release, for it to heal, for it to deactivate, for it to no longer be living in our system, We actually have to face it, feel it, sense it, let it do what it has to do so that it can come down the other side and integrate. I often use the example of a roller coaster or a tsunami, for example, right? The energy within that tsunami, for example, is huge. And if we haven't learned how to swim, I know that it's kind of a funny example because I wouldn't want anyone to go into a tsunami and swim, but just use it as a metaphor. I wouldn't ask someone, go into that tsunami and have a fun time riding that wave on your surfboard if a person doesn't know how to swim, for example, or if they've never waded in a pool, or if they've never even been in some bigger waves. We would have to start baseline at the beginnings. And so part of having the ability to gain more safety on board actually means feeling the things that we have avoided the most, like the tightnesses in our chest, the clenching in our gut, the fear that just makes no sense and just comes out of nowhere and it just overtakes us. These physiological responses, it's not just in the head, it's not just in the mind, it's in the body, it's in the somatic self. They're there because when we were, again, young, I'm talking from a more early trauma point of view, when we were young, when we were pre-verbal, before we could make sense of things, all of that stress, all of that fear goes into the body. But we're too young, typically, and usually if we haven't healed this, it's because we didn't have an adult, a caregiver, a regulated human being that could co-regulate with us, be with us to teach us the skills, the somatic skills to find regulation in ourselves. So if we didn't have that, the natural default thing is to go into a shutdown response, to go into a situation where we don't feel that intensity. We don't feel the survival. We don't feel the pain, the emotional tension, the sensations, the tears, the shaking. We shut it down. We depress it. We suppress it. We put it under the rug. We put it into the closet. We just get rid of it. However, doing that doesn't make that go away. It's still stored in the system. And we know through a lot of the work, especially the work that Gabor Mate has done around chronic stress and early abuse and childhood trauma staying with us, it will make us sick in the end if we don't get rid of it. But we have to go back to this concept of we can't always start with establishing safety. We have to establish a better foundational capacity to be with the survival stressors that we didn't have the skill or the support to be with when we were young. This is a very mature adult process. We have to go into this work knowing I want to heal this stuff. I don't feel safe. I can't form relationships. My health is suffering. My capacity to be in the world is suffering, to put myself out there, to get unstuck, to do the things I want to do because I feel terrified. And so a lot of practices will be, well, just, affirm, do affirmations, journal, say to yourself, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. The trouble with this, and, nothing wrong with doing some of these strategies to help resource us, but it's not getting to that deep nervous system, somatic, autonomic level. Therefore, to get to that level, we have to match it by feeling these intensities that are automatic, that just pop up. Most people don't sit in let's say a meditation or when they're chilling out and saying, okay, I want to feel all the intensities from this age at that trauma. The body usually doesn't comply that quickly. Often these intensities show up when we least expect it, when we least want them, and they kind of sideswipe us like that tsunami, right? And so what we need to do is do our homework. Hopefully that's why you're here. Get into more of the education, do some practicing, really take this on as we could say a project, a lifestyle commitment to work with these early traumatic stresses, these survival impulses, responses, those fight, flight, freeze energies that are trapped, not just in our nervous system, but all the systems that connect to the nervous system. Once we make that decision, okay, I'm going to do this work, I'm going to sense, I'm going to feel, but I'm also going to stay grounded, connected, oriented to the environment. These are all things I teach within my classes and e-guides and courses. Once we can get that on board and we keep practicing, we just keep adding, it builds our foundation, which then builds our capacity to be with more intensity. As we be with more intensity, it allows these things to bubble up that are old, and then they start to heal, they start to integrate, they start to exit, they start to discharge, they start to deactivate, all these fancy words we use that basically mean healing trauma, right? But we don't just go in immediately with, okay, I'm going to be safe, I'm going to feel safe, and then when I'm safe, these things are going to come out. It's actually the other way around typically. We still want to have, for example, sidebar, if we are living in a toxic environment still, or if we're living in a situation where we cannot settle because there's real threat, like beside us, sleeping beside us, living with us, country that we're in might not be safe, all of these things, everyone's going to be different. If we're still in a toxic environment, then this level that I'm talking about will be a little more difficult, because the perception, it isn't just the perceived cellular unsafety, it's also real. It's also outside my door or in my living room or in my bedroom. In that case, then we have to look at, okay, how can we build resource and boundaries and slowly build capacity to either get out of that toxic environment, set boundaries, do whatever we have to do. I've done other videos on this. I'll post them below. What can we do to gain capacity and resource so we have more robustness so that we can get out of that environment, right? But that's a sidebar. I am making the assumption that where you are now in your home, there aren't things attacking you. I hope that's the case. And so if we assume that to be true, we also will know that even if there's safety, I say that with air quotes, in the environment, doesn't mean that your physiology is going to know that it's safe. And your job, our job, when we know that's the case, is to build up the resiliency, the capacity to be with these tough things in little drop pieces. This is what titration is. I've done another video on titration. I'll post that below. We want to do them in bite-sized pieces so that we don't overwhelm and re-traumatize the system more. And when we can feel into these intensities, these little waves that come up, not the tsunami wave, but the little waves, we accomplish something. We're like, oh, I just felt that tightness in my throat. I sensed it, I felt it. I wanted to do X, Y, Z. I felt my body wanting to move, or I wanted to say something, whatever it is, somatically, we have a little bit of a win. We could say it's a success. It gives a bit more capacity in the system. And then the system and the higher brain goes, okay, the next time I feel something, I'm gonna do the same thing. And it's like we're building training wheels. We're getting more capacity on board so that eventually, as we get more capacity and we become more skilled at feeling these intensities, that in turn is what slowly builds up our cellular safety. Now, I hope this has given you a little bit of insight into this kind of paradox of how we want safety, we want to establish safety in the environment, but if the individual grew up in an unsafe environment where everything was bad and everything was out to get us, maybe quite literally, it's not as simple to just say, get safe first and then do the work. We've got to work with what is there in the system. And I've seen a lot of folks not succeed and get into this work because they're waiting for the right moment. They're waiting to feel better. They're waiting until they feel safer, and then they go in and do the work. And I'm here to say, start where you're at, start with little bite-sized pieces, because as we do that, and our system is smart, our higher brain and our physiology will feel what's happening, and it'll say, my gosh, that wasn't that bad. Yeah, it was a little shaky, felt a little bit of intensity, but I stayed connected. I stayed in my environment. I'm here today on this day. This isn't the past. This is old trauma that's coming up. I want it to come up, because if I don't have it come up and if it doesn't heal, I will not be well, and we want to be well. So thank you for the interactions. The one person I was talking to, it sparked this, and then the question that I got, it was on Instagram. It was a great question because it isn't always safety first. Sometimes it's feel the survival energy first and feel it in a way that is titrated, contained, and is got intelligence. We need to understand why we're doing this. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm making these videos. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, and if you haven't started my resources, please do that. Somewhere near this video, there'll be a little bell that you click on so you get my videos each week. If you haven't yet started with my ebooks or free resources, all on my site, my name, irenelyon.com. And if you want to start learning a little deeper with me and actually doing the practices in a more concentrated course, be sure to check out my 21-day nervous system tune-up. This is a self-study program, 21 days long, and it gets you into the basics of how to build capacity, more education, and practical tools to get into this body and allow these survival stressors to come up and out. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time.